Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Javad Nahami and these are the headlines. In Libya, the UN-backed government and the rival Eastern-based parliament have announced a countrywide ceasefire. In a statement, the government of National Accord urged demilitarization of the contested strategic city of Sirte and the Al Jufra district. Speaker of the pro-Haftar parliament, Gwaila Saleh, also issued a statement appealing for an end to hostilities across the country. Both the sides called for parliamentary and presidential elections to be held in March next year. The US has formally notified the United Nations of its demand to restore all sanctions on Iran, citing violations of the 2015 nuclear deal. In a letter to the UN Security Council President, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Tehran is guilty of significant non-performance regarding the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. China, Russia and other UNSC members to the agreement questioned the legality of the move as Washington unilaterally quit the accord in 2018. The European Union has called on Belarus to drop a criminal case launched against a new opposition body this week. In a statement, EU spokesperson said the bloc urges Belarusian authorities to engage in dialogue to move towards a peaceful solution. Earlier, Minsk launched a criminal case against the opposition's coordination council formed to seek dialogue over alleged rigging in elections. Brazil has reported 1,204 deaths and over 45,000 COVID-19 cases in the past 24 hours. In the US, 1,055 people died overnight, raising the toll to over 174,000 with more than 5.5 million infections. India has recorded 983 deaths in the last 24 hours, increasing the tally to nearly 55,000 with over 2.9 million cases. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 10 more people lost their lives to the virus, taking the count to 6,219 with over 291,000 confirmed cases. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 794,000 lives while infecting over 22.7 million people. Those are the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Libya, the UN-backed government and the rival Eastern-based parliament have announced a countrywide ceasefire. In a statement, the government of National Accord urged demilitarization of the contested strategic city of Sirte and the Al Jufra district. Speaker of the pro-Haftar parliament, Gwaila Saleh, also issued a statement appealing for an end to hostilities across the country. Both the sides called for the parliamentary and presidential elections to be held in March next year. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and the UN support mission hailed the ceasefire calls by Libyan warring parties. The mission also called for the expulsion of all the foreign forces and the mercenaries from Libya. Libya was plunged into chaos when a NATO-backed uprising in 2011 toppled longtime ruler Muammar Gaddafi. The country has since split between rival East and West-based administrations, each backed by armed groups and foreign governments. Israel's warplanes have attacked Gaza Strip for a 10th consecutive night. Israeli Defense Ministry says it struck Hamas's infrastructure and a military compound in retaliation for explosive balloons and rocket attacks. The ministry said the targeted infrastructure was used to construct tunnels. No casualties have been reported from the raids so far. Tensions have been rising for over a week now. Israel also closed the Karim Abu Salim goods crossing with the Gaza Strip. In a related development, the United Arab Emirates says several other Arab countries are on their way to normalize relations with Israel. In a virtual interview, Minister of State for Foreign Affairs Anwar Gargash said the region needs a strategic breakthrough. He said Abu Dhabi's relationship with Tel Aviv will bring a warm peace as the country has never fought any wars with Israel. Gargash also said UAE's embassy in Israel will be in Tel Aviv and not in Jerusalem. Israel considers Jerusalem its undivided capital, but the Palestinians see the eastern part as the capital of their future state. UAE signed a peace deal with Israel last week, becoming the third Arab nation to do so after Egypt and Jordan. Moving on, the US has formally notified the United Nations of its demand to restore all sanctions on Iran, citing violations of the 2015 nuclear deal. In a letter to the UN Security Council President, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Tehran is guilty of significant non-performance regarding the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Pompeo said Washington will do everything it can to enforce the UN sanctions on Tehran if they are violated. China, Russia, the EU3 and other UNSC members question the legality of the move. Moscow rejected the proposal, saying Washington cannot trigger a snapback as it is no longer part of the Iran nuclear deal. The UK, France and Germany said the proposal is incompatible with the 2015 treaty, while urging Tehran to return to full compliance without delay. Iran's ambassador to the UN, Majid Takhtravanchi, said Washington was misleading the world and with lies and fabrication.
Today, the US attempted to mislead the international community by resorting to lies and fabrications to supposedly initiate a mechanism under Resolution 2231. According to conclusive legal facts, the US is not a JCPOA participant and has no right to trigger the so-called snapback mechanism, and its arbitrary interpretation of Resolution 2231 cannot change this reality.
The US has reaffirmed its commitment to withdraw forces from Iraq within 3 years. In a meeting with the Iraqi Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi in Washington, President Donald Trump said US forces have significantly withdrawn from Iraq. Iraq's state media said Trump stressed the need to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the country, while a White House statement said Trump agreed that ISIS was destroyed due to the combined efforts of the US-led coalition and the Iraqi security forces. It said Iraq and the US should work closely to ensure that ISIS is rendered incapable of posing a threat again. The statement said COVID-19 pandemic has further highlighted the importance of working together to build a prosperous and stable Iraq. Al-Kadhimi is visiting the US for the first time since he became the Prime Minister in May this year. Turkey says it has killed 5 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in airstrikes in northern Iraq. The Defense Ministry said so far 107 fighters have been killed in Operation Claw Tiger, backed by air power. The ministry said Turkey will continue to destroy weapon caches and shelters used by the terrorists. State media said militants often use northern Iraq to plan cross-border terrorist attacks in Turkey. Turkey holds the PKK responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year conflict. Pakistan has once again expressed solidarity with the Kashmiris who have sacrificed over 100,000 lives due to brutalities of Indian occupation forces. In a statement on the occasion of International Day of Remembrance and Tribute to the Victims of Terrorism, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said, "We must remember and respect the Kashmiri victims of worst form of Indian state terrorism." Qureshi said since 1990, India's occupation army has orphaned 108,000 children and molested more than 11,000 women. He said Indian state terrorism has intensified since the military siege of 8 million Kashmiris on 5th of August last year. India injects yet another barbaric poison in the serene veins of the illegally occupied Kashmir. In its malicious bid to enforce demographic shift, New Delhi has issued 37,000 domicile certificates across the Udhampur district so far. Officials say these certificates have been issued both through online and offline mode. Indian officials have declared the fraudulent document mandatory in occupied Kashmir after its special status was repealed in August last year. Earlier, Pakistan categorically rejected the grant of domicile certificates. Kashmiri political leaders say they have always opposed the grant of citizenship rights to refugees settled outside the region. Moreover, India has witnessed an abrupt surge in COVID-19 cases as the country's caseload crossed 2.9 million. The Health Ministry says nearly 69,000 infections were reported in a day across the country. The ministry says 983 people lost their lives overnight, bringing the death count to nearly 55,000. The ministry said there are over 692,000 active cases in the country. It said the state of Maharashtra is the first affected, making up more than 37% of the country's cases. India remains the third worst hit country from the coronavirus pandemic after the US and Brazil. Brazil has reported 1,204 deaths and over 45,000 COVID-19 cases in the past 24 hours. In the US, 1,055 people died overnight, raising the toll to over 174,000 with more than 5.5 million infections. Now, globally, the virus has claimed more than 793,000 lives while infecting over 22.6 million people. More in this report.
The coronavirus pandemic continues to wreak havoc across the globe as governments scramble to secure vaccine deals. Latin America's combined death toll has crossed 250,000, while Mexico is set to receive 2,000 doses of the Russian vaccine to test among its population. Although Brazil's infection tally has exceeded 3.5 million, health experts claim the infection spread is slowing down in the country.
For the first time since April, the transmission rate of COVID-19 is slowing down in Brazil. According to the data from the Epidemic Control Center at Imperial College, the rate of contagion in Brazil was 0.98, a number that indicates how many people an infected patient can spread the new coronavirus to.
In Europe, the UK has removed Portugal from its quarantine list while adding Austria and Croatia. France has reported 4,711 cases overnight, a level last seen during the height of the epidemic in the country. Germany has also reported its highest daily toll since April with over 1,700 new cases. While in Australia, the second most populous state of Victoria has reported its lowest rise in fresh cases in 5 weeks. Meanwhile, New Zealand has put off the decision to ease restrictions in the biggest city of Auckland until next week.
Auckland has been at level 3 for 10 days now, and we did say we would check in on those settings today. As a cabinet, we have done that by looking at the latest information. There is nothing to suggest we need to change our course, and certainly nothing that suggests we need to escalate our response. But at this stage, we need to stay the course and retain the settings we have for now.
In Asia, mainland China has reported 22 new imported cases with no domestic transmissions. In South Korea, the virus fight is reaching a critical phase as 324 virus cases were reported, the highest for the first time since early March.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, COVID-19 active cases have dropped to 11,790, while 10 people lost their lives overnight. The Health Ministry says 630 people tested positive in the last 24 hours. The country's death toll has risen to 6,219, while the total number of infections crossed 291,000. The Health Ministry reported a recovery rate of over 93% across the country. Sindh remains the worst hit province with over 127,000 infections, while Punjab has reported nearly 96,000 cases. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Welcome back. Former Vice President Joe Biden has accepted the nomination for the president on the final night of the virtual Democratic National Convention. In his speech, Biden said if elected, he will end the season of darkness. This report has the details.
The fourth night of the Democratic National Convention in Milwaukee marked the highest point in Biden's political career. His nomination is the culmination of decades-long public career for the former senator who failed in his two White House bids in 1988 and 2008. A 10-minute-long video spanning Biden's lifetime of service was played before he virtually appeared on stage from his hometown of Wilmington. Amid the raging pandemic, the typical fanfare of the DNC was missing as Biden urged Americans to choose hope over fear.
It's time for us, for we the people, to come together. And make no mistake, united we can and will overcome this season of darkness in America. We'll choose hope over fear, facts over fiction, fairness over privilege. I'm a proud Democrat, and I'll be proud to carry the banner of our party into the general election. So it's with great honor and humility I accept this nomination for President of the United States of America.
A group of former Democratic presidential candidates held a virtual roundtable to give resounding approval of Biden's candidacy. His former rivals urged their voters to unite behind Biden and the vice presidential candidate, Senator Kamala Harris. Senators Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, former South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg, and others lauded Biden's decency and leadership.
This is clearly the most important election in the modern history of this country. And Joe Biden, you have a human being who is empathetic, who is honest, who is decent. And at this particular moment in American history, my God, that is something that this country absolutely needs. And all of us, whether you're progressives, whether you're moderates or conservatives, have got to come together to defeat this president.
Biden will take on the Republican Donald Trump in the presidential election on November 3rd.
The European Union has called on Belarus to drop a criminal case launched against a new opposition body this week. In a statement, EU spokesperson said the bloc urges Belarusian authorities to engage in dialogue to move towards a peaceful solution. The statement read the opposition group reached out for dialogue, but the authorities reverted to intimidation as an answer. It said EU's goal is to stop violence, help dialogue between members of the state and support the economic prosperity of Belarus. The spokesperson said the EU does not want to tilt the geopolitical balance for Belarus between the bloc and Russia. Earlier, Minsk launched a criminal case against the opposition's Coordination Council. The group is formed to seek dialogue over alleged rigging in elections. In Belarus, opposition politician Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has called on supporters to step up their strikes at factories across the country to try to force new presidential elections. In a video address, she told her followers not to be fooled by intimidation. Meanwhile, the US says it supports an independent international probe into electoral irregularities in the recent presidential election in the country. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Washington stands by its long-term commitment to support the country's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Pompeo also said Belarusians have the right to choose their own leaders and warned states of intervening in the country's biggest crisis. The European Union has levied sanctions on Belarus until February 2021. Russia says Ukraine should stop making excuses for not fulfilling their obligations under the Minsk agreements. In an interview, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said the constitutional consolidation of the special status of Donbass is the key to resolve the crisis in Ukraine. Lavrov said Kiev must follow the unanimous agreement of Normandy summit participants over a pact between Donetsk and Luhansk. He said all matters related to special status of the three regions should have been reflected in the new constitution of Ukraine before the end of 2015. Earlier, Ukraine's presidential office said 4 more locations in the eastern Donbass region will be cleared of armed forces. Relations between Russia and Ukraine soured when Moscow annexed Crimea in 2014. Doctors of a hospital in Siberia say they have found no traces of poison in tests carried out on Russian government critic Alexei Navalny. In a briefing, Deputy Chief of Omsk Emergency Hospital, Anatoly Klinichenko, said there are no traces of poison in blood and urine samples. Klinichenko said the hospital has a full diagnosis of Navalny's condition, but their details cannot be released yet. The announcement came shortly after allies of Navalny accused the Kremlin of thwarting his medical evacuation to Germany. Earlier, Navalny's spokeswoman Kyra Tarmish alleged he fell sick after drinking a cup of tea laced with poison. Yesterday, Navalny started feeling ill while returning to Moscow from the Siberian city of Tomsk. In Mali, the coup leaders say they will hold elections in a reasonable time, promising to respect the international agreements in the fight against militants. This comes as the opposition-backed military junta said the detained president Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta is safer in their hands for now. Coup leaders said a transitional president will be appointed, drawn from either the civilian population or the military. The opposition leaders say they will hold a rally in Bamako today to celebrate their victory. Leaders of the West African states say they will dispatch envoys to coup-stricken Mali to help secure the return of constitutional order. The opposition rejected ECOWAS stance on Mali despite UN Security Council and European Union also condemning the military's actions.
Today there have been debates between the ECOWAS heads of state. You already know the results. They want to come, they will come, but we won't move. New Mali. We want a new Mali, and that is why tomorrow we are calling out on our people inside and outside Mali to come out massively.
The World Health Organization and the UN Children's Agency have urged African governments to promote the safe reopening of schools during the pandemic. In a joint statement, the UN bodies said a prolonged closure of schools is harmful for the students and they want governments to invest in sanitation facilities. The two organizations said students are being exposed to poor nutrition, teen pregnancies and violence due to the suspension. WHO Regional Director Matshidiso Moeti said schools in Africa are a safe haven for children. Moeti said Africa cannot risk losing a generation in efforts to contain the virus. A survey says only 6 African countries have fully reopened schools so far, while some countries, including Kenya, have completely scrapped the 2020 academic year. In China's Sichuan province, continuous rainfall has caused 22 major rivers and 33 tributaries in Sichuan to exceed their flood warning levels. Swelling rivers have flooded some areas in the cities of Chengdu, Leshan, Yan and Yibin. The Yangtze River has recorded a water level of 193 meters, about 8 meters beyond the safety level. The Ministry of Water Resources raised the river's emergency response for floods from level 3 to 2. Yichang's Three Gorges Reservoir is facing a record high inbound water flow since the reservoir was constructed in 2003. Authorities say the flow has already exceeded 75,000 cubic meters per second. Meanwhile, officials say the rains and floods have affected over 260,000 people in Chongqing, causing an economic loss of about $354 million.
At present, our main work is to strengthen the inspection and patrol of emergency alert points, and at the same time, we will ensure the proper transfer of relevant shops and the evacuation of residents involved.
In the U.S., dozens of wildfires raging throughout Northern California have claimed at least 5 lives and threatened tens of thousands of homes. Authorities said more than 30 civilians and firefighters have been injured by the uncontrolled blaze. At least 9 fires raced through hills and mountains in the North Bay's Wine County, destroying more than 105 homes and other structures. Dozens of lightning-sparked wildfires are growing rapidly, forcing tens of thousands of people to evacuate homes in the San Francisco Bay Area. California has been hit by its worst lightning storms in nearly 2 decades. Governor Gavin Newsom has declared an emergency in the state and warned people to embrace for more hot weather conditions. 3 crew members on board the International Space Station will spend the next few days fixing an air leak in the vessel's Russian segment. In a joint statement, US NASA and Russia's airspace agency Roscosmos said the astronauts will also search for the source of the leak. It said the crew, comprising of NASA's Chris Cassidy and Russia's Ivan Vagina and Anatoly Ivashchin, will close the station's hatches. This will be followed by monitoring the air pressure and then finding the source of the leak. NASA says the agency and its international partners first noticed a slight increase above the standard cabin air leak rate in September 2019. The joint statement said the situation represented no immediate danger to the crew or to the space station. The UK's total government debt has exceeded the £2 trillion mark for the first time in the country's history. The Office for the National Statistics said at the end of July, UK's total debt was over £2 trillion, up by nearly £230 billion from July last year. The jump is 100.5% of the gross domestic product. The ONS said it is the first time it has been above 100% since 1960 to 61 financial year. The UK government borrowed £26.7 billion in July as tackling the coronavirus pandemic took its toll on the public finances. The figure was the fourth highest borrowing in any month since the records began in 1993. European stock markets have declined as the Eurozone recovery from the economic downturn hit the brakes in August. The Pan-European Stock 600 and Frankfurt's DAX traded marginally lower. The indices of London's FTSE and France's CAC 40 traded nearly 1% lower. Early Asian stocks rose following the release of mixed US economic data overnight. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.